once I actually tried, it was like this weight behind my eyes just lifted, and I felt just normal. Like I felt me again. Like I can actually converse again and speak. I wasn't stumbling over my words. I wasn't like I don't know, just in my own shell and scared to kind of socialize with other people. Like it was just it unlocked a new biological side for me that I just didn't know existed.
Welcome to the Mindful Method podcast, where we don't just fill your ears, we fill your mind with the tools to enhance your emotional and physical reality. I'm your host, Jordana Sade, here to guide you on this journey of the body-brain connection and help you take your power back to create the life you've always wanted. So grab a seat, because class is in session and our method is on the syllabus. Here at the Mindful Clinic, we're not just changing your mind, we're changing your life. One mindful moment at a time. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Mindful Method podcast. I am so excited for our guest today. This is actually, I think, one of the first times I've had a repeating guest on that wasn't like in a part one, part two series. This is the second time I've had Brandon on the podcast. When I had him on initially, it was the Head to Heal podcast, but I would really encourage all of you guys to go back and listen to that episode because, I know a lot about like weight loss, but literally some of the things you told me blew my mind. Like I still take fucoidan because I'm like, well, the body perceives weight loss as being an injury. And I just like get like really into it. So one of the things that I'll say before I let Brandon introduce himself and tell us his story is Brandon and I actually both went to school together. I mean, not at the same time, but we both went to the same school. I'm pretty sure you went to IHN, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And
Just
how we
finished.
met, perfect. And how we met was working at one of the strangest health companies in the whole world called Newtopia. Like it was such a weird company, but I've made so many amazing connections from there. And actually, Brandon's fiance, Rachel, if you guys have worked with us before, Rachel is my right hand. She's my support coach. We love her so much. But me and Brandon actually knew each other before I even met Rachel. So if anything, Brandon has introduced me to like one of the most amazing, wonderful humans in my life right now. So thank you for that. But Brandon and I always had really interesting conversations at Newtopia because there are very few people in my world that are as nerdy as I am about the science and the intricacies of things. And Brandon just like totally takes it to a whole new level in the best way possible. So I am so excited to dive deep into some really great topics today that I have personally been exploring. And yeah, anyways, I'll let Brandon kind of take the floor now. But welcome, Brandon. If you can tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey to be coming to where you are today.
My goodness. That's a really, really nice intro, Jordana. It's so nice to talk to you. And yeah, I think our last podcast was like 2021, 2022. Like it's been like at least 3, 4 years since we chatted before.
Mhm.
And I'd say like a lot of my research has definitely shifted. It's still within that gut bacteria space because our first
Yeah.
conversation was like the drawbacks of fat loss and how
Mm.
it's like more so how I got to that point of being able to kind of like trust your microbes to do the digestion like for you, like and rather than us kind of trying to elicit these control mindsets and so forth. But yeah, like honestly, for those who haven't really heard my story, this is something that I haven't shared too often, especially like on our Instagram and something I definitely need to embrace more so. But um, I'm sure you're familiar with the story, but I grew up very overweight. I was like that kind of little Italian kid who kind of self-medicated on Nutella sandwiches and pizza pockets and anytime something stressful happened in my life, I would legit just hold it in my body and play video games. Like if I
Mm.
see like a dog or like our dog Kuma, if he gets like attacked by another dog, like right after he shakes it off and he's good to go. So these
Mm.
are things and practices that I just never did at an early age. And I never really understood until I kind of came across psychedelic medicine. And of course, we're going to talk, of course, about methylene blue and the mitochondria and how I've kind of evolved to this piece now. But looking back, just to kind of like summarize the story pretty quickly, is I ended up losing about 70 pounds. So I went from about 220 to 150 in university. I think this was about first or second year university. I was just so sick and tired of being sick and tired. but I also
Mhm.
hated the way I look. Uh, I would look at myself and just be like, okay, like things need to change. Like my skin is awful. Like I felt very insecure in my body and my physical form. And it wasn't until kind of like cannabis and more psychedelic medicine that allowed me to kind of look inwards. But it's very interesting too, because when I look back on that journey, I see this kind of sad, very insecure, scared, overweight child. And it's like to this point in my life, I will never be him again, but I always will be. Like that piece is always there and I can still always recognize it. And I think that's what's giving me kind of more empathy to kind of feel for people in that similar situation. So like going back to it, I think just understanding the basis of health for me has been, of course, through psychedelics and that psychological piece. But it's like to see those past behaviors, like before as a kid, I used to like hunch. I used to kind of round my shoulders. Of course, it was the laptop, it was video games, but it was also for me to protect my heart. It would
Mhm.
protect the heart center and as I would kind of hunch forward, I also kind of developed like an anterior pelvic tilt, and these things I would later to kind of uncover. But in those times, those early periods in my life, it was because I just did not want to be seen. Like even
Mhm.
now as we speak, I'm like still nervous to speak my voice, and it's like it was also when I look back to it, it was a time where I would hide in my clothes because I was so ashamed of my body. I would go to
Mhm.
like the back corner of the classroom and just kind of hide. And I would never raise my hand or speak out of turn or just raise my voice because then that means all eyes are on me. And if
Mhm.
all eyes are on me, then it's just like, okay, people are gonna like my insecurities were just being projected to the room and my classmates.
Mhm.
So I just didn't want to be seen, and that kind of dampened that throat chakra, if I can even speak right now. But as I kind of like went along, I started to kind of piece together where we see, of course, like I got really into gut health because I've always had poor digestion, but it's also seeing things of like the three pillars of health would be your brain, like your spiritual side, your psychosomatic side. Like this is going to be the huge, like this is the most massive piece in all of healing is like your psychology, your spirituality. And I think I agree with Ram Dass when he says you can seek enlightenment from pizza and beer. Like
Mhm.
these are pieces in ourself that are very important to uncover and to go deeper. And then we look at our subconscious mind, and the subconscious is really just your body. It's your heart, it's my rounded shoulders, the pain in my neck that I've held for too long to protect the heart. And when you're kind of in a poor postured state, your organs aren't operating correctly. Like you don't really give them the space to actually contract or be in that kind of space that they need to function properly. And then there's the microbiology side. There's the piece where we can kind of look deeper to be like, you know what, this isn't just a combination of my mom and dad. Like that's exactly who I am. But there's also like our epigenetic potential, right? The things and environments that affect us. So for me, it was really deep into the microbiome and how our gut health can really shape our digestion. And the bacteria itself has its own unique genome that controls digestion completely, but also the mitochondria and how the mitochondria have their own genetic kind of information and code. And as we know now too, right? Like the mitochondria is maternal, right? We get it from our mother. And as we know, like too, like I know for yourself, Jordan, and myself, like we both have mothers who come from more Mediterranean backgrounds and whatnot. So this can be a huge indicator of how we actually absorb sunlight. Do we need more sun than the rest of the people? And I would say 100% because like even just her doing a DNA test and seeing what kind of haplotype she has for mitochondria, I'm at this point now where it's like I know, despite anyone else saying that there's no such thing as a healthy tan, I feel my healthiest when I have the most melanin on my skin.
Mhm.
So I think what's kind of shifted over the past few years since we spoke last is really like me uncovering the bacterial genome, but really transitioning to the mitochondria. And that's where I've came to found like methylene blue. So I know this is a huge long-winded answer to kind of just show my backstory, but you said to be quick, but um,
No, that was perfect.
uh, what I will say though, for that mitochondrial piece and to really what hooked me on methylene blue, of course, we can segue into like the mitochondrial aspect, is that like from our job that we worked together in Newtopia, we would have these 20-minute calls with people, and right after you would have to call someone else, and you would have to call someone else right after. And it was like this rapid succession of people you would talk to, and each call you would pick up the phone and talk to the average American who works in the corporate world. And you pick up the phone and it's like, oh, my brother died from COVID. Oh, like I'm suicidal. And it's just this darkness you pick up and what people are experiencing each and every day. And it's like, no matter how many times I microdosed or how many shrooms I ever did working at that place, it still wasn't enough empathy for me to like properly recharge and cope. And that burnt me out to like no end. So that was burnout that I was experiencing for a very, very long time, to a point where I was trying to really self-diagnose myself for a long time because the doctors couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
So I would test the thyroid panels, test all these different things, supplement glandulars and so forth, but it wasn't really feeling like I was doing enough until I found Methylene Blue. It was like years of research. Then I'm like, you know what? Like, I'm just going to try this. I always had kind of an aversion to it for some reason. And then once I actually tried, it was like this weight behind my eyes just lifted. And I felt just normal. Like I felt me again. Like I can actually converse again and speak. I wasn't stumbling over my words. I wasn't like, I don't know, just in my own shell and scared to kind of socialize with other people. Like it was just, it unlocked a new biological side for me that I just didn't know existed. And it was like putting me in touch with like that kid that I once was. So I think that's
Mm,
like kind of a long story short of how I kind of came to Methylene Blue. And then that's what really piqued my interest to kind of like, of course, start our company and launch our product, but also to kind of research it in all different aspects. So yeah.
perfect. Okay, man, I'm like literally taking notes as you're talking because there's so many things that I want to dive into. But the first thing that I want to say is I actually don't think you described your story in that same way in our last call because
Mm.
that the whole concept of the way that you were holding yourself to not to protect your heart chakra, to not be seen, and the impact on the flow of even just like oxygen or blood flow to really important organs, and how like that that created an issue in your body. I haven't, I know those things, but I haven't really thought about it and conceptualized it like that. And someone really recently told me, who hasn't seen me in years, but they saw me after I became a nutritionist, but far before I started studying the nervous system and like really came into my like evolution. They were like, Jordan, your posture is amazing. Like, in school, especially when I was just starting behavioral psychology, I would always be hunched over like this. And I actually just thought it was because I did way too much ecstasy in my like teen years. But now that you described it that way, I was like, that actually makes so much sense. Like, I was so closed off, my heart chakra, especially at that time. I was living in denial. There was so many emotions that I was hiding from, that I wasn't really bringing up to the surface. And I was really still that fat kid at heart, as still not wanting to be seen, still, even though I had lost so much weight, I didn't fully step into my like freedom yet. Like I didn't see myself that way. And so thank you for painting that picture, because it just gave me an aha moment. I'm so excited to get into Methylene Blue, and I'm gonna first explain my experience with it. Hi, babes. I am so excited to talk to you about my signature program, the Mindful Method. This is the exact same method that I have been using with hundreds of successful clients to help you heal your relationship to food, to increase confidence, and to lose weight without dieting or killing yourself at the gym. If you're sick of not feeling like your best self, if you're sick of promising yourself that you'll start again on Monday, if you're sick of going on restrictive diets only to gain back the weight, I can tell you right now that if you gained it back, it did not work. You know what's healthy and what's not. You do. You just continue to choose the unhealthy option anyways. And a meal plan will not solve this issue. There is no amount of restriction or discipline or willpower that is going to stop you from self-sabotaging. The body follows the mind. Imagine a life where you don't have to think about what you can or can't eat. Imagine a life where you feel confident in all of your clothes, where every day in every way your body rebalances and you lose all of the weight so you find the truest, healthiest version of yourself. Imagine never having to start again on Monday.
This is what happens when you focus on transforming the brain so weight loss is effortless. The body follows the mind, and it's time you actually get to the root cause of your issue. If you are ready to transform and find the truest, healthiest version of you without letting go of your favorite foods, I invite you to fill out the application in my bio. And if you're a good fit, we'll be in touch soon. Back to regular programming.
In a moment. But the other thing that I want to say, just like as an LOL between you and me, after me and Brandon hung out recently for Rachel's birthday party, and we were talking about sun and how it's so important, because I'm somebody who, if I'm like, I hate the winter, I need to be in the sun constantly. And my family just rolls their eyes at me because they think that like I just need to be traveling all the time and I just want to escape. And so I literally went to my mom the next day. I'm like, Mom, you know that I probably have a genetic like code, a genetic mutation that means that I need to be in sunlight always, or else my hands and feet are cold and I have Raynaud's syndrome. And she's like, oh, Jordana, like this is bullshit. But I'm like, no, it's actually genuinely really true. And, with the industry of red light therapy companies and blue light blocking glasses, like these are all things that are really hot right now. And I think there's a reason for it. So, we're all terrified of getting that sunlight because we're scared of, wrinkling our skin or getting skin disease or skin cancer. And I mean, we can debunk that later. That's a whole probably other podcast. But I always feel so much better when I have more melanin in my skin, to the point where I don't have cellulite on my thighs. And like in the wintertime, I'm like, what the hell is going on? Like I'm not eating anymore. Like it's like I'm eating the same, I'm exercising the same. And like in the winter, my thighs have so much cellulite compared to when I'm in the sunlight. My eyes are brighter. I have so much more energy. So this stuff is really real, and we are just really fancy plants. Um, but let me talk about my experience with blue methylene, because I discovered it before we had talked about it. My naturopath put me on it randomly, and she was like, start slow. And so I never did more than 3 drops of it, really. And I always kind of had it in my house. And then when you guys launched your product and you so lovingly gave me a bottle, thank you, you were like, work your way up. So I was telling Rachel the other day that it was the first day that I had taken 10 drops and I actually felt high. It was like it was like I took ADHD medication without the like sketchy, speedy quality, but my eyes were opened up. I could concentrate. I was so much more focused. I had this energy in me that I have not felt in so long. And I had a really tough year last year, and I was very depleted after like a very specific circumstance. And I've been working to try and get my energy back, and spiritually, emotionally, taking the supplements. But it really wasn't until I started higher dosing methylene blue that I'm like, holy shit, I feel like myself again. Like I genuinely feel so much better. So thank you so much for that. And like even the weight was starting to shift around. Like I feel lean, I feel energetic, my abs are coming back, and it's literally all because of methylene blue. So I can't wait to talk more about this with you. So first of all, I was taking methylene blue when I had first learned about it. I have no idea what the fuck it is. So, you mentioned a little bit more about the mitochondria and how we have genes from our parents, but that's not the entire story. Can you
Mhm.
tell our audience and explain to me as well, like what the mitochondria is, why it's important, and then we'll go into the methylene blue.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like also just to say on what the tangent was and everything you just shared was like I don't know how you do it. Like the family life, the business you're running, because you're saying last year was not good for you. It's like I did not see that. When I talk to you, see it on your face, you do not hold it. For me, I hold stress in like an insane amount. So like I need sun to kind of just detox it and allow the melanin to just do its work. But I would also say too, like I got really into the kind of the mitochondrial science, the melanin, the sunlight. It already proved just my own hypothesis when I was listening to a lot of like Jack Cruz, who I know you met, but also like I don't know if you ever talked with Dr. Alexis. Like we
Oh
we did
yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, we did this course together a few years back on like gut health and stuff, and I've seen like she's just such a wealth of knowledge for this. So I would say I would leave the kind of sunlight conversations to her because it's like, yeah, I would just be kind of like talking in her shadow for sure. But yeah, so I think when we look at methylene blue, It's interesting that you say that your naturopath actually prescribed this to you because it's one of the only things that we see that's recognized in both holistic medicine and Western medicine. You know,
Mm,
naturopaths, nutritionists, and biohackers alike are all using methylene blue, but it's also
mm,
on the World Health Organization as being an essential medicine. And it's
wow.
been used in hospitals. Like it was the first medicine to treat malaria in 1891,
Right.
because it was originally a dye for blue jeans and to stain cotton. And then they're like, oh, let's try a dye to actually stain parasites or bacteria and different kind of, I think it was meningitis, the actual kind of like bacteria that cause meningitis. So as it started to kind of progress, they started to see that it can stain the mitochondria and stain the cell itself. So that's when kind of things went just all into the research. It's like grandfathered in as one of the oldest medicines, so it's kind of like untouched by the FDA. So it's not something that can be like typically profited off of for the government. And I think there's a slight censorship around methylene blue right now for these reasons.
Yeah.
But that's of course not what I want to kind of dive into. But um, the way I see methylene blue and methylene blue is not just like this, there's no one panacea, right?
Mm,
Like there's no one thing that's just going to cure all because I think nowadays we're just really desperately looking for something to fix us. We're like,
yeah.
what's wrong, right? And it's like, as we know, we can't heal in the same environment we got sick in, right?
Mm,
So we have to really assess what our environment's like. But when we look at it, it's like there's methylene blue, there's light exposure. Our light environment's going to be huge, right? Because as we know, blue light really damages the mitochondria and red light enhances it. So, of course, we'll get to that. But the way I see methylene blue is almost like an adaptogen for the mitochondria. And
mm,
the reason being is because it has this ability to donate and to accept electrons from the electron transport chain. And this process really helps neutralize a lot of free radicals.
okay.
So, to understand this on a deeper level,
Yeah.
I think we really need to kind of like dissect the mitochondria, of course, like you asked, but
Yeah.
the role of the mitochondria is to convert glucose and oxygen into ATP,
Okay.
into energy. Adenosine triphosphate is what keeps us alive. And there was this scientist he published research in, I think it was 1889, James Blackstock, and he determined that you need to produce your own body weight in ATP every single day. So when you think about like ATP molecules just being completely immeasurable, and you need to produce, like for myself, I need to produce 75 to 80 kilos of this molecule, which is absolutely insane. So when you think about aging, especially, we potentiate aging and just counteract all of longevity when ATP production slows down.
Mm,
So methylene blue, just to kind of go back on its history, was used for cyanide poisoning and
mm.
carbon monoxide poisoning. So
Ooh.
if someone ever tries to poison you with cyanide, I doubt that's ever going to be the case. Then
You never
maybe
know.
a few bottles next to you. Just
Yeah.
so what cyanide does is that it will just slow down the electron transport chain. ATP production kind of just slows down until it hits zero, and we die. So methylene blue, as they would do IV injections of this and IV drips, it would just promote ATP production to speed back that electron transport chain.
Mm,
So getting down to this, like hopefully, of course, no one ever poisons us with these things, but we know there's an antidote that's possible. And there's actually I was looking at methylene blue in pop culture, and there's a 1946 movie called Decoy. And the premise of the movie is a woman is gassed and poisoned through cyanide and dies, and they resuscitate her through methylene blue. Of
wow.
course, methylene blue is not going to revive you, but it was just a gimmick for the movie. But very
Mm,
interesting that that exists. Um, so yeah, so the mitochondria will convert glucose and oxygen into ATP through what's called the electron transport chain. And then this energy in itself will enable the cells to kind of just maintain our survival, right?
okay.
So this is how we survive. So there was a good example given by this one doctor. I'm blanking on his name, but he said it's like a train burning coal for fuel, and
Mm,
that coal that you burn will produce smoke. So what happens with the mitochondria is that as energy production increases, it will start to produce oxidative byproducts. So it can produce some oxidative stress. So this is why the mitochondria relies heavily on antioxidants. And that's what
mm,
methylene blue is. It helps donate electrons to mitigate any oxidative stress. So okay, there's like terms of like electron transport chain, just these things we need to kind of like really dive into and make sure we understand. So
Totally.
when we look at the first piece to how we produce energy, we look at the food, right? So
Mhm.
breaking down our food is very important to see because, for example, like when you eat like steak, potatoes, and broccoli, your cells do not see carbs, proteins, fats. Like that
Mhm.
restrictive mindset we typically have of like, okay, I need to count macronutrients. It's like your cells don't give a shit. They just want to survive. So
Yeah.
they're going to pull and extract what they can and pull out micronutrients and electrons.
Mhm.
So I really believe that the state of your health is dependent on how well your body breaks down food and translates that into electrons and micronutrients. So it's really dependent on your gut and your mitochondria.
Totally.
So when this happens, like your food gets broken down into electrons, and then what we end up having is inside the mitochondria, there's like this sequence of complexes. And they're just proteins, but it's complexes 1 through 5.
Okay.
Complex one, two, three, and four are your main pieces for energy production. Okay, so we'll complex five, which is ATP synthase. But I think the best way to kind of look at it is like an assembly line. So it's like once electrons enter the system, they go through like transport or complex one, sorry, and they start to move down the chain. And each complex they go through, they start to give out small amounts of energy at each step. And how they do this is called proton pumping. So as electrons move through the chain, they're like they have these little tiny power pumps that push protons, these charged particles, to one side of the membrane to the other. So they're just
Mhm.
kind of like it's just an assembly line as we go through. So what this does is it starts to build up pressure. And it's kind of like if I can say like water in a dam, we have a dam and the water is just kind of being built up. So there's a lot of energy being produced at each step.
Mhm.
So then eventually we come to energy release, which is like our ATP production. So what happens is these protons kind of rush back through like just through the whole piece and they hit complex 5, which is ATP synthase. And this is like water spinning through a turbine in a dam. So this motion, as it increases in speed and energy, it will produce more ATP. And this is what your cells need to function. This is what keeps us alive. This is what keeps me talking. So what ends up happening is that along the way, as electrons are transported from complex 1 all the way through complex 5 to ATP synthase, there could be some leakage. And some electrons can kind of like leak out and get back into the cell, which means it's almost like a waste. And this creates reactive oxygen species. So, what we see in the research is typically abbreviated to ROS. So, we got to think of oxidative stress.
Yeah.
So, just you producing energy creates stress. And we need antioxidants to kind of help mitigate this. This is what the mitochondria heavily relies on. So
Yeah.
this is where methylene blue comes in because methylene blue is like the ultimate electron donor. So as it donates electrons to the oxidation and the oxidative stress, it helps mitigate that. And then it just kind of reduces this toxic buildup, which this leads to better energy production with less
Mhm.
oxidative stress overall. So that is pretty much the ETC, like the electron transport chain in a nutshell, and how the mitochondria kind of functions. And then what we look at is like complex one being like your NAD, which is what we're kind of really obsessed about these days.
Yeah.
And then the other main player is complex four, which is cytochrome C oxidase. And these are the major players that methylene blue works on. So methylene blue
Mhm.
will help upregulate NAD,
Yeah.
but it will donate electrons to cytochrome C oxidase complex 4, and it gets its name, cyto meaning cell and chrome meaning light. So this is
Mhm.
also what red light acts on as well, and like the kind of the light we get from the sun. So this is really important. Like red light is like your physical energy from the photons, and then methylene blue is like your chemical energy from the actual substance itself. So that's why like they're just so much better in conjunction with
Together.
each other.
Yeah. I have so many questions. I'm like, oh my gosh, because there was a time when I was in like full burnout, and it was when I was training for marathons. And so, and I could be actually, I'm actually asking you genuinely, because I could be totally off here. But when we think about something like lactic acid or like, like toxic buildup from like production of like when you're trying to like create energy, but it's creating more like toxicity and inflammation, would something like methylene blue prevent that process?
Yeah, so I think this is where we got to be careful too, is because methylene blue in low doses is very, very powerful for helping to prevent this.
Yeah.
So methylene blue can help mitigate a lot of that kind of toxic byproduct within the
Mhm.
mitochondria, which is
Yeah.
extremely, extremely important.
Yeah.
The thing with methylene blue is that we want to keep things in low dosage, and this is like a big piece. So to answer your question, like shortly, like absolutely, like yes, like this is, and I also want to preface too that before I go on these methylene blue tangents, this is not medical advice.
Yeah.
Like this isn't like like, oh no, like he told me to like dose
Yeah.
300 milligrams. And like, no, this is typically what we see in the research.
Mhm.
Um, and typically what we see for dosage is on the low side in clinical research is about zero point 0.5 to 3 to 4 milligrams per kilo of body weight. I
Okay.
like to keep low dosage at 1 milligram per kilo of body weight. And when you really think about it, so if you take like a dropper and 2 drops is 1 milligram,
Mhm.
if I'm taking 4 milligrams per kilo of body weight, that's like 650 drops roughly.
Okay. Okay.
So like this isn't something that you want to do every day. But the reason I'm mentioning this too is because if you're taking excessively high doses, it's not that it's a bad thing, but you should use it sparingly because it accumulates in the cell.
Yeah.
And it accumulates in the cell, so that means the effect will not wear off for about maybe 2, 3 days. So after a high dose, you'll kind of like still see like your urine turn blue and whatnot.
Yeah. I
As
noticed that
you're
recently. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you actually notice that your pee is blue from 10 drops?
Yeah. Like and before I was like, oh no, that doesn't happen to me. But then when I increased my dose and now even like since then, since I had that like, wow, this is the best day ever from taking 10 drops, I just want to take more and more and more. This is my addictive brain. Also because I used to get NAD injections, like IV NAD, and it's like $700 every time I go. But I would feel so good for like a week. And now that you've just explained that whole electromagnetic chain, like or the electron chain, and understanding like the 1 to 4 and understanding where NAD like fits in there, it makes so much sense because the effect that I get from even just 10 drops of blue methylene is like the exact same effect I get from like an IV of NAD. And I just didn't even put those two things together. I'm like, but like that's literally what's happening.
Yeah, so this is actually, I think, one of the most important factors to really understand is I think with NAD drips, personally, this is not a popular opinion, but I
Yeah.
think we're barking up the wrong tree. I think
Mhm.
it's not accessible to the average individual. So that's one thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But thing is when we deal with inflammation on a daily basis,
Mhm.
most likely complex 1 through 3 tend to be a lot of culprits that get shut down from inflammation. So like your legit NAD pathway on complex 1 can be just completely out of whack, and
Wow.
you can force NAD into the cell and you can have those benefits, but it's not actually repairing anything.
Yeah.
So methylene blue has that kind of like what I was saying before. It's almost like an adaptogen for your
Adaptogen.
mitochondria. It can help kind of
Yeah.
rebuild and help heal.
Whoa.
Um, so this is where I'm like kind of we need to understand like okay, like you can take methylene blue, but still like what's the root cause? Like what's happening here?
Mhm.
So I think to really understand this too, you need to understand like inflammation and where inflammation stems from. And a big thing that we kind of see nowadays is like, okay, is it like seed oils and deep fried foods?
Mhm.
Is it our blue light environments, right? So for example, like we see a lot of clients who wake up, they rely on coffee to start their day, and I'm absolutely guilty of this myself. And then
Mhm.
you go right in front of the computer and you're just
Mhm.
lit by blue screens. You're sitting all day, so your energy is stagnant, nothing's moving, and you're so tired by the end of it that you have no time for anything else but to eat a quick dinner and watch a movie just to
Mhm.
unwind. So you're constantly indoors, not in nature, not getting the light exposure that you need, and you're excessively around, like, say, blue light, for example. And the reason I mention this is because this is extreme stress on the body. Like blue
Mhm.
light is a cortisol response, and blue light's only accessible typically on midday. Like you may get
Mm,
hints of it around sunset, but it's typically when the sun is highest in the sky and it has less atmosphere to travel through. And this is
mhm,
what kind of wakes us up, right? It's like we wake up and we blunt, like the melatonin kind of cycle repeats and so forth. So most people we tell it to, it's just like, like, are you stressed? I'm like, no. But I'm like, because like typically a lot of times when we ask a few more questions, it's like stress is almost perceived as like I got in a fight with my partner or
mhm,
like my boss is yelling at me. But it could also just be you sitting down at your chair in front of blue light every single day and not actually just moving that energy around and kind of, so forth, just like not remaining stagnant and optimizing your environment, right? So it comes back to that main point of like the only way we can heal, like we can't heal in the same environment we got sick in, right? So we need to kind of assess that as the root cause. But where I'm going with this is like stress is a huge inflammatory inducer, right? So like that is like something we can typically all agree on. And the
mhm,
thing is when we are inflamed, this forces the mitochondria, so inflammation in the body, no matter where it's coming from, will initiate the mitochondria and force it into glycolysis. So what ends up
mhm,
happening is when you force the mitochondria to switch, you're legit forcing it to switch fuel sources. So you switch it to force from the electron transport chain, which is what we want, and you force it into a state of glycolysis, which is a very inefficient way to produce energy, and it yields about, I'd say, 10% of the ATP production you would get from the electron transport chain. So the kind of like TLDR on this is like chronic inflammation impairs mitochondrial function.
mhm,
And the reason to understand that's important is because a healthy cell should be able to switch from utilizing oxygen and glucose quite readily,
mhm,
and meaning glycolysis and oxidative phosphorylation, so OXPHOS for short. So
mhm,
that is what a healthy cell should be able to do. And unfortunately, like if a cell is only utilizing glucose for energy,
mhm.
like it's a tumor. Like that's what tumors do, right? If things
Whoa.
like that's oncogenic, right? So when we look at like a lot of the treatments nowadays for where the research is going for killing tumors, it's hyperbaric oxygen, so forcing oxygen into cells that can't really support it. Red light, methylene blue. Like there was a podcast recently with like I keep getting sent this on Instagram, but it's like Joe Rogan and Mel Gibson talking about like him curing cancer from like ivermectin and methylene blue and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I actually I haven't looked into ivermectin, so I don't know about that, but um, there is a lot of research shifting to the anti-oncogenic effects of methylene blue for that reason.
Yeah.
So to kind of take things into an even deeper level is what we see with methylene blue is that it activates autophagy and it activates what's called mitophagy. So
Ooh.
for those who may not be familiar, autophagy is like the main benefit we get from fasting or fasting mimetic diets where we
Mhm,
restrict protein and sugar. And it's like your body's natural cleanup system that's when you abstain from food, your body now has time to kind of search for damaged and old proteins and debris and just recycle that and get rid of, right? So
mhm,
autophagy, as we know, is good. And like anything in small doses, it's always good, right? You can get too much autophagy, believe it or not, and you can have too much growth in the form of constantly consuming protein. So there's something called mitophagy as well. And this is where mitochondria just undergo that process of being able to kind of recycle and regenerate. And this process should happen every 30 to 40 days.
mhm,
But say we are constantly inflamed, we start to recruit more inflammatory cytokines. We upregulate genes, and one in particular, this gene upregulates a protein called USP 40 or USP 30, I think it is. And typically, what happens is this completely just blunts the mitophagy process. So, what mitophagy is, you'll see in the research, it's typically under the name of mitochondrial biogenesis.
okay.
And what ends up happening is when mitochondria gets damaged, and this is in your best case scenario,
Mhm,
they get tagged with what are called these ubiquitin chains, and then they get transferred for degradation and recycled through the lysosomes in the cell. And
mhm,
then this regeneration just ensures energy efficiency. Like this is like the prime situation. This is the natural process of what your mitochondria should go through. But that chronic inflammation that we may be going through And that stress that we may be experiencing just completely blunts mitophagy.
Mm.
And then the typical follow-up question we get for this is like, well, like what's like, does it matter? And it's like, absolutely, because you will die younger. If like your mitochondria are not functioning properly, like this is what elicits and potentiates disease states. If you're not producing new mitochondria and you're not efficiently producing ATP and energy, you are legit potentiating premature aging. And we see a lot of people these days going for things like Botox and kind of surgeries to be like, okay, why am I aging so quick? Well, it's like I honestly believe the stress behind that is more damaging than the actual kind of lifestyle itself. But these are the things that we have to look at because when we're using things like red light and methylene blue, extremely, extremely anti-aging because it's helping the mitochondria go through that process of mitophagy and
Mhm.
recycle much quicker.
Mhm.
So the main thing with that is also like the biggest question around this is like, where does your mitochondrial density lie? And when we look at it, your highest mitochondrial density is in your retina. So like the window to the soul, right? So your vision. And that's what we see like when you're constantly on screens. Blue light
Mhm.
will cause macular degeneration. You will lose your eyesight constantly looking at blue light.
Mhm.
But the most amount of mitochondria in your body is in your brain. Like it's like a tenfold difference between the other organ systems in your body.
Wow.
And when we look at that, this is your longevity organ, right? So your mitochondrial density is next highest in your hearts, your liver. Of course, you have your skeletal muscle, but
Mhm.
it's also like I've heard Jack Cruz talk about this too, where it's like gorillas hold their mitochondrial density in their muscles. That's why they can lift a human and toss them across a room like it's nothing, right?
Mhm.
But for humans, if we're constantly forcing our mitochondrial like density to our muscles by constantly weightlifting and building bigger muscles, it's not to say weightlifting is bad in any sense,
Mhm.
but to kind of see this body as like a tire with infinite tread can lead us down the wrong path. And this is like, I think, a big reason why we see people who are bodybuilding and competing in these competitions from like the age of 16 to 50 or so forth, that they typically die young. Like the lifespan and the history kind of speaks for itself, right?
Yeah.
You don't see people in the blue zones in Sardinia, like this 120-year-old man who's like completely jacked. And of course the body does degenerate,
Mhm.
but we got to look at like these people are living a long life because they have adequate sunshine. They
Mhm.
have adequate farming. They have a social life. Like being antisocial is oncogenic. Like
Mhm.
that's something that could potentiate cancerous states from just being lonely.
Mhm.
So having community, having uh, more kind of natural lit environments from the sun, picking up free electrons from the earth, walking barefoot, this is what we see within those blue zones in those regions of people living long lives. So if we're acting on the mitochondria, we got to understand like, okay, well, what is anti-aging? Why are you doing this? You want to live a long life? You need to act on the organs that are going to help you with that. So that's going to be your brain, your liver, your heart. These are so important to kind of take care of. And this is where methylene blue and red light and all these things can really, really help. And even with that too, like this is a big reason when you search, like even on Google Scholar, if you just search methylene blue Alzheimer's, methylene blue Parkinson's, dementia, there's so much research in abundance when we see like human clinical trials and showing that methylene blue enhances mitochondrial function in the brain. It reduces tau tangles, it reduces beta amyloid plaques, it repairs dopamine receptors, which is another huge kind of topic, like using methylene blue as a
Oh, God.
antidepressant.
Oh.
Um, but just to kind of end that kind of thought here is like we will live a longer life if we, I guess, I want to say like stop living for vanity and start living for like how you feel internally. And how you feel internally is going to be your brain and that gut feeling. Listen to your intuition, listen to your mind. And the reason I say that too is because I know, like in my 20s, I acted a lot on vanity. Like as I lost weight, I wanted to kind of get fit and healthy and look good to kind of like show that I could do this to the people who made fun of me before. And it wasn't until kind of psychedelics that showed that, where it's like, wow, like I just want to feel good. Like I'm kind of sick and tired of just like living for someone else because life is so short. And let's be real, like the dead do not get remembered, right? It's like it's
Mm.
for the most part, you may kind of like have a thought about them, but it's like enjoying it in the now in life. And I think that's what's kind of like funneled a lot into my research and whatnot. So I hope that kind of makes sense. But yeah, that's kind of to finish the thought on the longevity piece.
That was honestly perfect. And I mean, one thing that I love about you and why I could literally talk to you forever is you're just you have such a well-rounded mind. Like you really do think in all aspects before I can even prompt you to like think about, what about the spiritual? Like you've already kind of come full circle with so many of the topics and ideas that you have. So I really appreciate you doing that because obviously like that's so much of what this podcast is about. But one thing that I wanted that came through really clearly when you were talking, which I thought was so super interesting because, I agree with you. Like, obviously, we always want to look at the root cause. Like, nothing is ever going to be that magic pill. However, I do really feel like taking methylene blue solved like 99% of my problems. But because the reality is, and I'm so guilty of this, but I can't just pick up my life and move into a blue zone. Like I have kids here, they go to school. My entire job is on the phone, on the computer. We live in this world, and they're like, every client that I've ever worked with, and especially in a virtual clinic, like when I say things like, okay, you need more sunlight, you need more this, like a lot of them are just like kind of roll my eyes, okay, got it. But like we can't just pick everything up and go to a new place. So having options like getting a red light, wearing blue light blocking glasses, taking the methylene blue, though it's not a root cause necessarily magic pill solution, can really be that bridging gap to like where you feel when you're in feel like shit syndrome, like the FLS syndrome, where you're just tired, you have no energy, you can't, like, no energy for your kids, no energy to go out and be social, you've lost your joie de vivre. It can kind of bridge that gap to give you that oomph back so that you can be a little bit more active, and then show up better in less inflammatory states. Because when I talk to my clients, again, you and I both have dogs, and we both you actually posted this thing the other day and I commented on it because I was like, oh, so guilty of this. You were like, I can't remember exactly how you put it. Maybe you could share, but like I was like, I hate winter, and in your thing, it was like, I used to hate winter, but like that's not like solving my problem. Having that mindset, kind of. What did you say? You remember?
Yeah, that's that was yeah, that was a while back, but I think it's almost like you're like I felt how okay, sorry. I felt like I had this mind state where I can like if I was like every single day I was just like, "Oh fuck, it's so cold. Like this sucks. Like,
Yeah.
oh, I hate winter. I want to
Well,
be in the sun." And it's
yeah.
just like I was resisting the fucking weather. Like it's like, man, be here now. Like live in the moment, feel it, let it come to you. And it's like one of my favorite things is like resistance is the most toxic force on the planet. And it's like it's so true. I had so much resistance against the cold, and it's like, I think with like your points on that too, it's like I've thrown away vitamin D supplementation. I used to be an advocate for it. Gotten rid
Yeah.
of that. There's like I don't want it in my life anymore. I think I'm because one of the things too is like if you can charge up from the summer, you're gonna hold on to a lot of that vitamin D in your fat tissue. It's a fat soluble vitamin. And it's like if I tested my levels now of vitamin D, it's most likely going to show up of what my vitamin D levels were 3, 4 months ago.
Mm,
So it's like you're really charging up in summer to come through it. But another thing too is like the methylene blue and the red light combination is been such a game changer for winter. It's like one of the
mm,
only things that I feel that has actually helped me through the winter for the first time ever.
yeah.
Like it was like before I was supplementing vitamin D, but I didn't even like really know what I was doing. I was just taking, I'm like, you know what? Like you can get like 15,000 units of vitamin D from like 15 to 20 minutes in the sun exposed, no
Mm,
sunscreen. So I'm like, I'm going to dose 15,000 units of vitamin D here and there. And it's like, I don't know, it's like it didn't really do anything. I didn't notice a big difference, but it wasn't until I actually allowed myself to be cold and embrace that kind of feeling and sensation and use the methylene blue and the red light to kind of help charge the mitochondria. But another piece to this too is that when you get cold, you are literally increasing cellular hydration. Like you are increasing mitochondrial function. Like it's exactly what you need.
mm,
Like when you're away from the sun, cold is going to be biologically the next best thing. So one of the things that we have nowadays is like we're constantly shielding ourselves from the environment we live in.
Mhm.
Like we're bundling up and we never feel the cold when we go outside. We're constantly in these kind of rooms that have the thermostat set to like 20 to 23 degrees or whatever it may be. So we're always in that state of comfort. And our body, for the first time in human history, is not actually feeling what it's like to be cold. So I think
Mhm.
that's why it was like a big reason I made that post was just like, you know what? Like we're gonna have a sauna, then I'm gonna just jump in the snow. And it's like I'm gonna
Mhm.
feel this. It's so uncomfortable. It sucks. But then afterwards, it's like, holy shit, I feel great. Like I feel so good. And it's like maybe I actually don't need the sun right now because it's like, of course, me and Rach want to like eventually, more so me, move to like Italy and be in the Mediterranean and have like 3 euro bottles of wine and drink on the beach and just have like just be beach bums together and have that kind of like lifestyle in the sun. Um, but that's not feasible within at least the next few years, right? So I think it's like to make do the methylene blue, the red light, and actually allowing yourself to experience the cold is super, super important for like your mental health, your mitochondria, and just to, I think even I've heard new research on cold exposure can force the mitochondria to produce its own UV light, which is
Whoa.
absolutely insane. So
Yeah.
I know we are creatures of light, we are beings of light. I don't know 100% if this is like the end all be all truth in stuff. And of course, more research needs to happen on this. And this is,
Mhm.
of course, something to talk about with, like, say, Dr. Alexis, if you ever do talk with her. But it's just very interesting to see that, like, you can produce your own light by forcing yourself into kind of like these cold environments and like back then before I was so addicted to kind of these fads, right? Of like keto and carnivore and vegan and FODMAP, anything to find a fix. I was just constantly searching. But the one thing I always came back to is like we are seasonal creatures, like I'm
Mhm.
not gonna like keto doesn't make sense in the summer. You have adequate sunshine, you're active, you're walking, berries and honey are in abundance. You're not gonna just be going for like counting your carbs in the summer. It just sounds kind of like a form of neurosis, like you're just kind of neurotic. And that's exactly what I kind of went through. So I think it's just like it's cold, get cold. It's hot, be hot. Enjoy the sun and like leverage your own natural environment to kind of feel that. So, I think I stopped burning less when I stopped wearing sunglasses. Um,
Mhm.
I stopped burning less when I stopped wearing sunscreen and allowed my body to adapt, right? Because the sun is typically only damaging when you are burning yourself constantly, going out of the sun for a long time and coming back into a burn. You need to kind of like build up that solar callus. So I know I can talk for a long time on the sun because I am a lizard, like 100%.
Mhm.
Um, but like I need to adapt to the winter. So that's kind of where I'm at now. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, perfect. And like I mean for people who are listening to this, like your energy is so infectious and even like I'm sitting here and you're like, yeah, if you can't change it, embrace it, Jordana. Like, just go out and I'm like, oh, like my thermostat is like so high. I'm like sweating in the middle of the night and I just drove up to this beautiful farm and I had like my jacket and the butt warmer on and like the hand steer on. And so I'm hearing you and I'm going to make changes. But one of the things that Methylene Blue really helped me with, and this was like, it was immediate. It was like, I woke up one day and when I took the a bit of a higher dose and I just felt resilient again. Like I had that energy. And so listening to you now be like, yeah, go embrace the cold. I'm like, I'm at a farm. They have a beautiful dog. Like I can't wait. I brought my snowsuit. I can't wait to go roll around in the snow. And I think though, for people who are listening, what I would love for you guys to take from this is that if you're in the place where you're like, no, fuck the cold, or I'm too tired to do XYZ, like methylene blue can actually help you bridge that gap to start like feeling like yourself again so that you can have the energy to actually change the root causes of why you're feeling so shitty all the time.
honestly, Jordana, that's like a perfect thought because that just reminded me as well. And I think this is so in tune with like your vision, your voice, and like even like the business that you've built is very interesting enough. Like when people ask me, they're like, "Hey, what does methylene blue do?" And I'm like, honestly, I'm like, what doesn't it do? Like you can search methylene
Right?
blue and so many. Like I saw like recently it was just like I was researching how methylene blue and ultraviolet light, like UVA, UVB light and stuff, can that combination can cure you from snake venom. Like if you're bitten by a
Stop.
snake and it's
Stop.
inject venom and it's like
Oh
methylene
my
blue
God.
makes it more susceptible to the ultraviolet radiation, and it's like that can help mitigate the poison that the snake's inputting into your body. So I'm like, okay, fuck, if I ever go to Australia or like the rainforest, like I'm definitely packing a few bottles on me if I get bit. But
Yeah.
um, besides the point, like I think one of the things that I found really interesting in the research is something that psilocybin and microdosing can also do. But
Mm,
methylene blue has been shown to actually inhibit the fear response in certain phobias, which is
mm,
really, really interesting because I think one of the studies they did was they showed like people who had a phobia of spiders, and they showed them a spider and their fear response was just like insane. And then they dosed them with methylene blue and they felt like ready to kind of tackle that fear. And it's like that in itself, I think is so important because one of the things too is like we need to understand like what are our limiting beliefs? Like what are the
yeah.
things that are
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
stopping me from being who I want to be? And
Right.
it's not to say like, hey, if you take methylene blue, like you're cured, and if you stop taking it, like you like you're done, like all your progress is lost.
Mm,
But the one I think really, really cool thing with it is like if it can be your crutch in the early stages to get past that most scariest point, and the most scariest point for anyone who suffered with ADHD is just starting. Like that is the
yeah.
scariest point, right? So it's like, hey, what's stopping someone from signing up for the mindful clinic and being like,
Mm,
hey, like I want to be the best self possible. Well, it's
mm,
like I'm scared, and it's just like if you have something like that can be like that can elicit better serotonin and dopamine that's not necessarily psychoactive, because I know if we kind of talk about psilocybin and LSD and ayahuasca, these things can be a bit scary. It puts you really
yeah.
face to face with like the ego and who you think you are. And of course, that can be its own podcast in itself, but
Mm,
it can at least help it be like, I feel more ready to be able to kind of conquer this thing in front of me.
mm,
And this is also kind of, I think, important for me to segue is because this is again for research. This isn't medical advice.
mm.
This is one of the main contraindications with methylene blue is like antipsychotics and antidepressant medications.
Good to know.
There's only been a few cases where it's actually been proven to lead to serotonin toxicity and
Yeah.
serotonin syndrome.
Mm,
And it's typically in higher doses of, say, SSRIs and SNRIs and other MAO inhibitors,
mm,
because methylene blue is a low grade MAO inhibitor.
yeah.
So, for those people listening who don't know what MAO is, it's monoamine oxidase, and it's an enzyme that targets dopamine and serotonin, and it degrades them very rapidly. So what methylene blue does is it happens to inhibit that enzyme from replicating and taking over. So serotonin and dopamine can last a bit longer in the brain, so you feel very elated and you feel more ready to kind of conquer like your mental health or things that kind of feel more challenging. So personally, like in the research, when methylene blue was used for depression, bipolar, anxiety, it was used in higher doses at around like 150 to 300 milligrams, which is typically that of like an IV drip.
Mm,
Um, so that's something, of course, like not to do every single day if from what we see in the research, but it's something to do kind of periodically, a few days a week, if that's the kind of route you go through. I don't think IV drips of methylene blue is available in Canada. That's more
mm,
of like a US thing, if you want to go to like
mm,
California and whatnot. Um, but ultimately it's like this has that potential, and for what I've kind of experienced myself too, it's like my mood has just become like way more regulated as
yeah.
well when I do take it. It's like
Yeah.
in even the days I don't take it, I feel like holy shit, like I think my mitochondria is working better, my brain feels like it's working better, and it's like again, like even if I take a week off, I feel like it's still done something extremely powerful to bring me back up to equilibrium.
Mm,
So that's just one thing I wanted to say too, is just because there are some contraindications for methylene blue. So it's not always like there are some things that we do have to be careful with. But
mm,
in the low dose, like for what you're taking, 10 drops is about 5 milligrams. And
mm,
what I would say, like, there's not much research to even I don't think many people have researched 5 milligrams because it's like a really low dose, but you're still
mm,
feeling amazing effects.
yeah.
Typically, it's around 8 to 32 milligrams, tends to be
Mm,
that kind of low and slow sweet spot that you can do kind of daily.
mhm,
If you are doing something excessively, like if you're doing that kind of 300 milligrams, like if I started dosing 600 drops of this tincture every single day, then it can build up in the tissue and it can lead to more of a hormetic response. So like if you're familiar with like hormesis, with like kind of that stress response on the body.
Mhm.
So if you're doing it a few days a week, it can lead to kind of positive stress. But if you're constantly doing it, then you're kind of getting past that safety zone and getting into that danger zone, right?
Yeah.
So that's just for high dosing. That's just something, of course, we all need to be aware of. But like when you're kind of going in these low doses, it's really nice. It's very safe. It's very, very effective, and the research just speaks for itself. Like it's been around for over 100 years, and it's like constantly being researched and used all over the world. So yeah, it's one of my favorite supplements. I think I've gotten down to pretty much just methylene blue, some creatine, maybe some like whey protein here and there and some red light. And it just feels nice to kind of just finally kind of come off of supplements a bit. Because that's also what like mushrooms always show me. They're just like, okay, you've been supplementing shit for like
Yeah.
at least 10, 15 years steady.
Yeah.
Let's give your liver a break and stop supplementing things and just like keep it very basic.
Mhm.
And like I honestly, yeah, I can't even see a difference. Like I don't even want to envision my life without methylene blue at this point because it's just like
No,
it's such a very good help. So
I'm literally getting there as well. And I'm like low key, like even just hearing you explain it in the way where you're like, it actually, the whole phobia thing, and I personally feel that, like, I went on a date last night that I was like really nervous about, and I typically do get nervous for first dates, but I just felt so good yesterday. And yesterday I took 10 drops of methylene blue like twice because I like refilled my water bottle twice. I didn't finish the second bottle, but I just felt so good. I was like, it just doesn't even matter what happens on this date tonight because I'm amazing, and like I love myself. And I was in that state, but like whether that was the methylene blue or just like potentially the time of the month I'm in or whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. But these are things that normally I feel really nervous about and I get really in my head, and then that drains me. And I've just felt so fucking good since I've started taking it, Brandon. I'm like low key want to drip it in the tap system in all of like throughout all of North America, that's so that people stop being afraid to sign up for my programs and like also just start like living their lives, because I really do feel like my best self. And I'm not just saying that. And the beauty is, I know, Brandon, I could literally talk to you forever. So, but just to be mindful of the time for the podcast. But you guys just launched a product. Your product is the one that I use, and I just absolutely love it. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put the link in the show notes, and then I have a code. I believe it's Jordana. Yeah.
it is,
Um,
yeah.
and so you guys can also take advantage of that code. But do you want to just share with the audience where people can find you? Because I'm sure they just want to eat your shit up now.
Yeah, honestly, thank you for that. It's just like you're always so wonderful to talk to, and I love your energy so much. Um, I'm so glad that our lives and everything has like kind of continued to cross like
I
after
know.
Newtopia, and especially through Rach. So it's
Yeah.
been it's been really sweet. So I really do appreciate you, and I'm so glad that it's like really helping you as well because that's honestly the feedback. Like with methylene blue, like I was trying and experimenting for many months, and I was just like, you know what, like I want this to be, of course, affordable and to be in kind of higher uh, bigger units because I was going through it quite rapidly and my methylene blue bill was very, very high. So I'm like, you know what? I want to bring something that's like a larger format bottle that's going to be somewhat relatively cost effective, of course, like because we
Yeah.
want to make this stuff affordable as possible.
Mhm.
And like, because we're all searching for that fix, we're all searching for something that's going to heal us. And like, of course, we need to kind of dig deeper into our environments, but methylene blue is just like a fantastic medicine that I've discovered and I want to share with the world. And it's something I feel I've always hated selling things and like promoting things
Mhm.
unless it really truly aligned with myself and my soul. And that's
Mhm.
something that methylene blue has done for me. So you can find us at the Nutritional Paradigm. We're very young in our business. Like we're still starting off and we're branching off into our own supplement company, which will be like Paradigm itself, just Paradigm. But right now it's the nutritionalparadigm.com. And same thing at Instagram. It's at the Nutritional Paradigm. So,
Yeah. We'll
yeah.
link it all up. And it's so funny because I get like supplement companies all the time, and like beauty companies ship me shit all the time. And I know my old assistant used to like drive me crazy with it, because she's like, Jordana, you got these free samples, you have to make real, like you have to go. And I just like can't do it. Like I genuinely cannot promote something that like I don't use and love. And so when you
Yeah.
hear me saying this, guys, like I'm very, very genuine. It has changed my life, and I'm buying it in bulk. And on the retreat that we're doing in a couple of weeks in Costa Rica, everybody who's coming is getting a bottle, and we're also using psychedelics. So I'm really excited to have my red light there. So I'm really excited to see like how we're going to combine all these like
Yeah.
biohacking things. Like people are going to come out a brand new person. So
I
anyways,
love it.
Brandon, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. If you guys liked this podcast episode, please don't forget to like and subscribe and share it with somebody who might need it. And we'll see you back on another episode of the Mindful Method podcast. Bye.